China has repeatedly said that we doesn't recognize the illegal McMahon Line.
If the Indians want to use the McMahon Line as the border between China and India, why couldn't we use the Victor Gao Line along the Ganges as the border between China and India?
What is your advice to the Indian side to not to use the boundary question as the full picture of the bilateral ties?
For India not to engage with China for mutual benefit will be a huge loss for the Indian people.
Some narratives or even some misunderstandings or even some negative portray to this region. What is your response?
The misceptions and the wrongful, false accusations about China as far as Xizang is concerned is an attempt to separate Xizang away from China, which will never be allowed.
Mr. Victor Gao Zhikai, we know you have visited the southwest China's Xizang autonomous multiple times, and you recently also paid a visit to Ningqi area. And many people in the world, especially for those who care about the development in this region, they would like to know more about the living Buddha. And we know from the tradition and through the legal process, the reincarnation of the living Buddha is not decided by the Buddha itself, but by the central government. What is the tradition or legal process behind this kind of mechanism?
Well, the reincarnation of living Buddhas, including Dalai Lama, is a very clearly defined process. The current Dalai Lama is the 14th, and the next one will be the 15th. Now, the final selection of the Dalai Lama is a very complicated process. It involves the high-ranking monks in Tibetan Buddhism, as well as a very critical, indispensable role to be played by the central government. It is only by a combination of these very complicated, interrelated, interlocked processes which will eventually result in a fairly and transparently elected and appointed next Dalai Lama. And I hope China's Xizang autonomous region and all the relevant parties will have peace and stability in preparation for this important transition.
Actually, I remember previously you have said you have visited the Xizang autonomous region multiple times, and you tell all your friends that once you have got the opportunity, you must come to this place and to have a real sightseeing and to have a more and better understanding about the development in this region. But when you travel to many Western countries, there are some narratives or even some misunderstandings or even some negative portray to this region. What is your response to those kind of misunderstandings or negative portrays?
First of all, Xizang is truly a unique and extraordinary place anywhere else in the world. And I do hope every one of the 8 billion people in the world will have a chance to visit Xizang at least once in your lifetime. Otherwise, it may be an eternal regret that you've never been to Xizang. My personal feeling is that in Xizang, you are much closer to heaven or to sky, for example.
The roof of the world.
Yes, the clouds are so close to you, so much closely. You can reach your hand and almost touch the clouds and touch the heaven. So it gives a greater sense of spirituality in Xizang. The perceptions and the wrongful, false accusations about China as far as Xizang is concerned is an attempt to separate Xizang away from China, which will never be allowed. And they actually mischaracterize what China has been doing in Xizang over the past several decades. The truth is, Xizang has been completely transformed as an economy. Xizang now is highly developed, not only in terms of connectivity, roads, highways, all kinds of schools, buildings, you name it, in terms of the living standards of the people, in terms of the life expectancy, which is a very important measurement of the quality of life. Now, in this way, Xizang's rapid economic development is a reflection of how China itself has been transforming itself since 1978. But many people in the West, first of all, they don't understand, they don't know about what's going on in Xizang, and then they paint the transformation in Xizang completely in negative terms, as if, for example, Xizang is a living hell in the world. No, and I do believe people in Xizang are enjoying a much better life. They get better educational opportunities, as well as medical and medical care opportunities, elderly care opportunities. So nobody should really distort the fact about Xizang. And I want to tell your audience, no one in the world, no political force, no country in the world could ever change the fact that there is only one China, and Xizang is part of China.
I know during your recent trip to this region, and you also visit Ningchi area, and that is pretty close to the Jiangnan area of China. And you have said a lot of words about your recent trip to there. What have you observed, especially when you go to the boundary area?
Yes, I was in Lingzhi, and I went all the way up very much to
The line of the control.
the line of actual control, which is not the border, because as far as China is concerned, the real border is on the south side of what we call Zangnan, south.
Yeah, because China,
South Xizang. Yes.
China has repeatedly said that we doesn't recognize the illegal McMahon Line.
Absolutely, because there was illegal McMahon Line drawn up not by an Indian person but by a British, and he drew the line without consultation with the Chinese side, and no Chinese central government representative ever participated in the discussion, etc. China has never accepted the McMahon Line, for example. However, India wants to use the McMahon Line as the border between China and India, either in the eastern section, which China calls the Zangnan, South Xizang area, and India, in more recent years, came up with a name called Arunachal Pradesh, which China does not accept. Now, I debated with the Indians about the invalidity and the illegality of the McMahon Line, but they refused to accept. To such an extent, I told them that if they want to use the illegal McMahon Line as the border between China and India, which China will never accept, I, meaning Victor Gao, can draw a line. They said, where do you want to draw the line? I always said, I want to draw a line along the Ganges.
All the way from the Himalayas to Ganges.
Exactly that. So I basically say, I can draw a line along the Ganges, and the territory or the areas to the north of the Ganges will no longer be Indian land. Many people in the world call this the Victor Gao line.
Yeah, I saw that on the social media and also
Exactly.
on other websites.
Which is, to start with, a complete refute of the illegality of the McMahon Line. Because if the Indians want to use the McMahon Line as the border between China and India, why couldn't we use the Victor Gao line along the Ganges as the border between China and India? So I hope the Indian side will realize the futility of clinging to the McMahon Line as the border between China and India for the eastern section of the border between China and India. Sooner or later, and the sooner the better, India need to come to the negotiation table with China to find a mutually acceptable solution of the territorial disputes between China and India. China will never accept the McMahon Line, and India need to surrender the South Xizang area, which is almost 90,000 square kilometers, back to China.
Yes, actually, China has made it clear, as you said, that China doesn't accept the illegal McMahon Line and also the establishment of the so-called Arunachal Pradesh, and China believes that is illegal and it is invalid. But also China has continued to make the standardized geographical names for the Jiangnan area. How should China further convey its stance on this part?
Well, as I mentioned, the South Xizang area has a total area of about 90,000 square kilometers. It was traditionally inhabited by the people in that area, which are much closer to the Chinese and the Tibetans to start with. So there is no legal background whatever for India to claim that South Xizang area was Indian to start with, and by custom, by tradition, by cultural heritage, you name it, this part of the South Xizang area has always been Chinese. Now, it is true that when Britain was running the British Indian Empire, they kept pushing the edge of the envelope. They tried to climb up to the Himalayas. They even wanted to intrude Xizang itself. And this is the root cause of all the troubles in that part of the world. In a sense, whatever McMahon Line did to draw this line, claiming that line should be the China-Indian border, was not only illicit and illegal, it was completely against the logic on the ground. Therefore, I want to tell everyone in India, while China and India should really treat each other with respect and decency, the Indian people should never expect that China will accept the validity of the McMahon Line and treat South Xizang as if it was Indian territory. No, it is Chinese territory for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and India will not have any justification to continue to hold on to the South Xizang area. Strictly speaking, South Xizang area is occupied Chinese territory, and India should return that occupied Chinese territory to China, and the sooner the better.
And in terms of the China-Indian border, and actually when I talked to some Indian professors or scholars, they said, okay, China-Indian border area is the whole picture of the bilateral ties, and they linked this kind of issue to other related areas. But from the Beijing's perspective, the boundary question is not the whole picture, and we can have other cooperations and we can have other communications in other fields. So what is your take from both sides, and especially what is your advice to the Indian side to not to use the boundary question as the full picture of the bilateral ties?
Well, first of all, the boundary dispute between China and India need to be resolved, and the sooner it is resolved, the better. And I think China will very much defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity. China will never allow South Xizang area, which is more than 90,000 square kilometers large, to be occupied by India anymore. That's number one. Number two is whether India wants to treat the border issue as the totality of China-Indian relations. I just want to tell them one thing. Whereas back in 1978, the size of the Chinese economy and the Indian economy were more or less on a par with each other. But now, Chinese economy is about 5 times as large as the Indian economy. Now, according to my own personal observations, China as an economy is completely different from the Indian economy. China by today is already one of the most industrialized economy in the world. China is really in the cutting edge of scientific and technological breakthroughs. China is one of the only 2 countries leading mankind in artificial intelligence. Therefore, for India not to engage with China for mutual benefit will be a huge loss for the Indian people. Many people in the world talk about China and India in the same breath, as if China and India are 2 similar or even identical countries.
They're totally different.
No, they are totally different. I think we are probably minimum 20 years, if not 30 years, apart from each other in terms of the level of economic development, in terms of science and technological excellence, for example. One example is very simple. China makes all the military weapons by itself. India can never make all the military weapons, airplanes, warships, you name it, by itself. Why? Because it doesn't have the industrial capabilities and the technical expertise to do that. That is one example to show how different China and India are today as 2 economies, as two military powers or as two political powers. It will be absolutely in the fundamental interest of the Indian people to recognize this and to engage with China for mutual benefit, rather than, for example, dismissing China off as if China is a non-consequential country. No, China is one of the most consequential countries in the world of today.